Hi, I'm Medulasa, and I'm about to explain to you how to make a music. Welcome to part 4 of my God knows how many part video series on the creation of a new subgenre of Gothic based in my background as an electronic musician. So far in the series, we've covered my rationale for doing this, what the Gothic has been and currently is known to be in music. And most recently, we've also covered the philosophy behind my interpretation of what I'm calling the new Gothic. This month's episode, I'm building on the knowledge that we've accrued so far in building a menu of compositional techniques that we can use and have available to us in the new Gothic. If you recall, in exploring the Gothic in music, we created a single sheet method that was very handy of ingredients that can be used in any new Gothic music going forward that don't necessarily have to conform to what's been created so far in terms of genre and style. Here's the list as it stands, and feel free to pause the video to take a look, or it's linked in the information below. What I'm going to do this episode is to give you some of the explanations of some of these and some musical examples, and to illustrate how they can be used in our new Gothic. Suffice to say, nearly all of this is like demo material, and most of this won't end up on the record, or it's an old track, or it's just made for completely for demonstration purposes, or it might find its way into like some other project. I mean, like I've got other projects like DJ Netflix and Church of Decay and the Dub Witch Horror, which some of this could be useful for, but like I probably won't be. But don't judge me too harshly based on how they sound. This episode was made kind of like right up against it. So yeah, without further ado, let's fucking go! The primary factor of the Gothic in music in the course of our investigations in exploring the Gothic as composer was timbre. We boiled down a few of the ideas timbrally, but I wanted to demonstrate a couple for you now, just to get a sense of the sound world of the Gothic. Chief among those were time-based effects, reverb, delay, flanger, chorus, echo, etc. Anything that like messes with the timing of a signal to give you a sense of space or definition or just like a change. For a solid example of flanging, you can check out The Cure's A Forest, which has it on like almost every instrument in fairly heavy doses. Like, yeah, I know, Bob, we all get that moment where, you know, we have a new toy for the first time and we're just like, I'm going to put this on everything, which is exactly what he did. But for a little handy demonstration of what flanging can do for a Gothic rock track, so I thought I'd record a little example of flanger in practice, using honestly quite a shitty Gothic rock riff just over some like sampled drums, and using like obviously very basic setup. But I just wanted to show you like the power of time-based effects, especially flanger for goth music. You know, we're going for a little bit of like a Cure-ish, cultish kind of vibe, and it kind of sounds a little bit something like this without the flanger. So, fine, very boring, whatever. You add flanger to the mix, and it becomes a hell of a lot more exciting, psychedelic, kind of, you know, kind of gives that sense of like eerie shifting space that goth does so well. also just want to add this other little demonstration of reverb that I'm in the middle of processing to do with a place called the Old Courts in Wigan, which is where I'm based and where I grew up. So this is a guitar part that I recorded kind of like almost completely unplanned at a place that my dad apparently, reportedly, although he was known to tell fibs, worked at as a child, called the Old Courts in Wigan. Their main chamber I got access to as part of this project. You know, kind of telling them about like, you know, my grief and my, you know, my dad's like life and how that inspired this record. And yeah, I took the 12-string guitar that like he helped me buy, mostly because it was the loudest guitar that I have and I didn't want to take an amp with me. Just in case, you know, just in case it sounded interesting acoustically. I recorded a reverb in there that I'll be doing a separate video on later that I will be using across the record. But I also wanted to get this kind of like the sense of quite a far away, very sad, dirgy guitar being played while I was there. No click track or anything, just or plan even, just vibes and chords. But again, because I wanted to use the space, the reverb of the space, I've had to do quite a lot of post-processing, as you can see, just kind of make it kind of more usable. And I've had to warp quite a lot of it just to make sure that it fits, you know, to tempo. I thought the space was acoustically interesting and, you know, it kind of locks into this idea of the Gothic. And again, because it's associated with, you know, grief and the death of my dad. This. So again, just kind of like a, and it's so lo-fi because like, you know, you're getting this like kind of far away feeling from the reverb. Again, like the Zoom recorder for this was like a good, at least 6 feet away from the source. I was mostly trying to record as much of the hall as I could. And bringing that out is a little bit of a challenge, but like, we'll get there. In terms of reverb, I'm going to demonstrate a fun little technique, that I stole from Andy Wallace, who mixed Jeff Buckley's wonderful Hallelujah. Wallace creates this gorgeous, like washy but defined reverb by blending like 3 different reverb spaces together. And here's a short demonstration of that. So I just wanted to give an example of Andy Wallace's like 3-reverb mix technique that he used on Hallelujah by Jeff Buckley. Again, like a gorgeous, absolutely gorgeous guitar tone on that. But obviously started off very, very humble. I mean, humble-ish. I mean, it was still Jeff Buckley's hands playing a Telecaster. You know, it's going to sound pretty damn good regardless. But what Andy Wallace did in mixing that guitar and creating, honestly, one of the most beautiful guitar tones of all time, that also has this like such a feeling of space that like I do think it could qualify as Gothic, especially like that discordant opening. I think that has significant utility for our new Gothic, like this kind of like mixing of reverbs of space. And again, like, you know, according to our research and in video number 2 that we did, spatial processing is like a huge part. So anyway, don't judge my guitar playing. I'm not Jeff Buckley, and this was done very much with my back against the wall, kind of last minute, but I thought it was kind of cool to show you and demonstrate. So here's my clean tone. So as you can see, like really nothing special. Completely dry. It's just my Jazzmaster into like a JC 120 emulation. Really, really clean, really, really simple. And the first reverb that we're going to go into is a very, very like near field tiled room reverb. For all of these examples, I'm using Valhalla. They are absolutely goated. I really can't complain. I mean, like, if you know, this is like industry workhorse kind of stuff. I'm using a very short pre-delay, a very short decay, extremely short decay, 100%. Again, like kind of tiled room preset-ish. Like I've messed about with it a little bit. The whole thing is to get this like a very near sense of space that kind of imparts upon the guitar tone like a very special quality. And this is what it sounds like, just clean guitar into a tiled room. Now already that's much more interesting, much more like wistful sounding. It imparts this kind of like sense of melancholy to an extent, but it's just not ethereal enough. So what we're going to do is we're going to add a medium reverb. I'm using Valhalla's Vintage Verb here. We have a slight pre-delay, so it feels like it's coming from further away, a longer decay, plate preset generally, and a pretty like intense low cut. Like we're actually cutting into, honestly, like some of the actual lows of the guitar there. I do think it works to keep the sound quite tight though, especially in the face of what we're going to do with it with the hall reverb. So this is what this sounds like on its own. This isn't with the tiled room reverb. You know, you think that's pretty good. That's not too bad. Okay, yeah, but like, you know, we do need even more ambience. We need some kind of almost like pad beneath the guitar. So this is what we're going to do is we're going to add a longer reverb, cathedral reverb. But basically we're going for like a large hall reverb. Honestly, might even increase the amount of decay on that. So quite a long decay. You know, if you're thinking about being in a space such as a cathedral and you just like clap, the decay is how long that clap will take to disappear sonically. And it's usually quite a long time in a cathedral, as I would know, because I did a research trip in a cathedral recently. The pre-delay, again, is how long the reverb itself is going to take to kind of like activate. So think of it as like it's the amount of time in between the actual clap and when the clap first returns to you as the listener from the walls that it's reverberating against. And again, quite not too much of a low cut. You know, we're just kind of like rolling off like basically the subs here. And it sounds like this. That long decay. So notice how it's like kind of allowing the mids to kind of mingle and become something, you know, like almost like a pad sound. That's great. It's wonderful. We've lost all definition though. It's not particularly good for, you know, an actual instrument. So what Andy Wallace did as a genius was to combine all of these on sends at the same time and have basically like the same sound going through multiple spaces at the same time that creates this like honestly very eerie, unreal kind of sound to it. Very, very beautiful stuff. My approximation is nowhere near as good. And also, I will say too, like this is really not EQ'd or anything, so like don't judge me too harshly. But as far as I recall from the video of Andy Wallace doing this trick, the sends were pretty much on full wet. I think the room send, the tiled room send, was a little bit like honestly not used that much, but like, you know, let's for our purposes, let's put it up pretty high. And yeah, just try and get a sense of how these different spaces are interacting in this, like, you know, kind of like sonic wormhole to an extent. So that's significantly better than where we started, which was... Yeah, I think that's a bit of an improvement. Another one of the features that we picked up is unreal or abstract sound design. So sounds that bear little resemblance to anything like real, or sounds that operate in the area of something of like sort of real, but not, creating an uncanny valley effect or just a feeling of weirdness. For this example, I'm essentially breaking a tone transfer plugin, which is an AI trained on a specific audio dataset and applying the tone of that dataset to whatever audio is incoming. The program I'm using was basically something that was in beta at the time. The company has released a full version of it, which is a lot more competent at what it does, but I don't like using that as much. Plus, it's not free. So this program is buggy, and I'm purposefully using inputs that are too complex for it to parse properly, leading to something that has some resemblance to the instrument that it was trained on, but also completely unlike it. So as you can see, we've just got a very simple setup here, just piano and a serum synth, just kind of for demonstrative purposes. And we have Newtone, which is a tone transfer plugin that has numerous models in. We're using the organ Bach just to like stick with the whole Gothic theme, but I probably will be using other models too. Anyway, without further ado, let's just have a listen to this. Again, this is just like super simple, nothing like, you know, groundbreaking. So that's just the acoustic piano on its own. And then here it is through Newtone. As you can hear, it's doing a pretty decent job because we're using quite simple inputs. But now what I'm going to do is use a more complex input, and this is what it sounds like raw. And now when we put that through Newtone, you can hear it struggles with the input because it's much more complex, which leads to a variety of really interesting sounds, inharmonic sounds. And yeah, I think it's kind of fruitful for the Gothic to kind of like have this like weird, uncanny, like it kind of sounds like something, it kind of doesn't sound like something approach. One of the final examples that I've got for you is the use of ancient sounds, which appears to be like really important to the Gothic. It contributes to this like sense and feeling of being like out of time or like haunted by the past. That's integral to like any kind of interpretation of the Gothic. For example, in the intro track for this, I'm using a dulcimer, but I'm also across the record, I'm using a dulcimer, harpsicord, organ sounds quite a bit. And here's an example of the organ sound that I kind of came up with the other day. I don't think I'm going to use it because it sounds very much like The Cure. But yeah, it's an indication of how the Gothic relies on this sense of like ancient sound. In terms of instrumentation, previously the Gothic had included like a basic setup of a rock band, but like deeply altered through post-processing techniques, affecting their timbral qualities. Isabella van Elferen pointed out that human vocals in Gothic music rarely appear as they would in like opera or pop music, often afflicted by some deep affectation, such as the hollow voice, like Peter Murphy of Bauhaus, and the tortured voice of like Robert Smith of The Cure and his beautiful pained wailing, or distorted vocals. I'm going to show you a bit of an unreleased like DJ Netflix Medulasa collaboration track here for examples of like the pained wailing, another vocal affectation that I think deserves inclusion, even though it's from like the metal side of things, which is the scream. So this next thing I want to show you is a couple of vocal techniques. Don't judge me too harshly. I'm still working on, this version of the vocals. I have no idea when this is going to be released or whatever. But yeah, this is very scratch vocals, so forgive me. I am in training for this, but this is kind of a take on the hollow vocal and the pained vocal to an extent. And this is for a track that's honestly, I have no idea where I'm going to release it. It's somewhere between Medulasa and DJ Netflix and kind of like a post-metal-y kind of thing. And these vocals are, this is quite brave what I'm doing right now. So here's like the isolated vocal from it. So we've got quite a high-chested voice that's kind of reminiscent of what Isabella van Elferen calls the pained vocal. Think like, Robert Smith, it's quite like high in the throat, but I'm also trying to combine that with like a chesty kind of like hollow kind of sound. Thus all like the very long syllable, the very long like vowel sounds. There's also a little bit of distortion on there. And time-based effects, which again, also very, very Gothic. And I'm also combining that with a more controversial pick for the Gothic voices is like kind of death metal-y, black metal-y screams. But I do think they qualify because they are the human voice removed from its like normal singing context. I also think that like in this specific instance, and when I use it, it's kind of what the Weird and the Eerie calls exorbitant presence. It's like it's too much. It's like it's extreme. Like it's extreme. That's where it comes from. It comes from extreme metal. And my vocal in this kind of sounds like this. Again, time-based effects are doing a significant amount of heavy lifting, as is distortion. But again, it's like this push into something that's like almost like inhuman. I think that's honestly pretty useful for our new Gothic. Another important part of instrumentation is the use of extended techniques, which I guess the above vocal techniques could be considered part of. In some of the other groundwork that I've done for this project, I've been using an Ebow on guitar, which is for those who don't know, it's a small electronic device that vibrates metallic strings, mimicking bowed strings like a violin. It kind of just sits on top of the strings like this, and yeah, very, very useful. Here's an example that I came up with a while ago. In this instance, I'm also putting it through an extremely starved fuzz pedal, creating an aching, sputtering sound that feels somewhat unreal, foul, perverse. There's a lot more to the signal chain in general, but it's one of the methods of extended technique I'm using to make the familiar become unfamiliar. And it goes a little something like this. So heads up, these aspects are only some of the compositional methods that we're going to be using in our new Gothic, and only some of them that turned up in our Exploring the Gothic video. The more interesting and more like outre aspects of what separates the old from the new Gothic is going to be in the next video, which will be on the 14th of November. The world deserves more than 4 on the floor. One of the main things that came up in our exploration of the Gothic was an avoidance of basic 4 on the floor rhythms, or simply creating grooves that don't rely on like very basic backbeats. In general, in my practice as a composer, a musician, whatever, I've tried to avoid 4 on the floor rhythms, like especially as Medulasa. In general, I've often relied on like clave rhythms instead, like my track Medulasa. And even using garage type beats way back in my day as like Pet Cemetery. So a few techniques I've kind of lumped together are all about the merging and clashing of distinct elements. Eclecticism, Juxtaposition, and Discontinuity. One example of eclecticism from my own back catalogue is the sample-heavy stuff that I did on New Year, New Metal, using samples from multiple different sources to create mashup music. Although in the new Gothic, this is much more likely to manifest in like the remixing and augmentation of traditional Gothic music structures. In terms of discontinuity, I want to throw down my old track Bastard Son that has this like weirdly breathing vibe twist in it at a certain point after minutes of doomy metallic buildup. It feels very discontinuous from what came before, and it's kind of like a little bit of a shock to the system. Juxtaposition also kind of follows these same rules. Think about Nine Inch Nails' March of the Pigs, and the way that the piano, they're like, doesn't it make you feel better? Interlude just like erupts suddenly from like the brooding industrial part immediately beforehand. Also under this category, we can throw in just like huge dynamic shifts. Another one of the pillars of our exploration of the previous Gothic is that of the influence of ambient music to evoke the eerie. For my part, I've often used ambient music influence in my music to create a tension between like the long, lush, floating, gentle pad sounds and the more violent, raucous aspects of my work. My side project DJ Netflix is entirely born of the tension between these two things, creating ambient gabber, which seems like a musical oxymoron. In the new Gothic, however, it's much more likely to be used in a way that creates that dynamic juxtaposition and related absence or failure of presence that cropped up in our exploration of the weird and the eerie in music. Here's an example from my recent demos that builds from edge of hearing sounds to something loud and vicious. Musical hybridization is kind of related back to like the eclectic approach above, but generally aiming for a more robust synthesis of distinct elements rather than trying to exploit the tension between the different elements. For this, I want to refer back to my old track Bastard Son again, where the use of liggety-like, screechy, cloud-like classical strings rub up against doom metal guitars, industrial percussion, and other bits to create a deep, gloomy, atmospheric sound that only really works because those disparate elements have found some commonalities together. A less interesting version of this is the weird as fuck demo that I found on my hard drive recently, of just harpsicord and death metal guitars, trying to find some kind of weird synthesis between those. So enjoy that. for the Gothic that I feel is like deeply underutilized in modern music as a whole, especially electronic music, where it's theoretically easier. In classical music, rubato is the method of expressively playing with tempo to suit the music structure. Think of pretty much like any Chopin piece that you've heard as an example. Whenever you hear it, it almost certainly will speed up during peak moments and slow down in cadential or restful moments. It's something I've tried to institute before on a track on my first release's Medulasa meat songs called Membrane Fragmentation. There's a part towards the end of the middle eight, or what I think of as the middle eight, where the track slows down about 20% before hitting back to like the main thrust of the riff, and it goes a little something like this. Now, this basically just requires like tempo automation on my end, but I guess the main issue with doing this a lot more in electronic music, and I guess which is probably why it's not been done as much, is that most electronic music comes from like a dance music background, wherein, you know, messing about with the tempo is going to make it like much more difficult for people to lock into the groove. And also confuses people's DJ software. Like the amount of times when I've included something like that, or like a beat switch up or something, and then people kind of complain because like they can't DJ out properly because it goes from like 140 to 175, and the DJ software is reading that as somewhere between those two pillars. It's, yeah, I get it. I mean, like, I get it, but like equally, like, come on, you can do better. But I also feel like the shifting of the tempo works really, really well in the Gothic. There's been excellent manifestations in Gothic rock, for example, especially Susie and the Banshees, who were really fucking good at it. Their track Sin in My Heart has this like very, very slow start, and it just like builds faster and faster until it gets to this, you know, peak groove. It's really good. And also their very transformative and discordant cover of Helter Skelter by the Beatles, again, starts really slow and eerie and fairly horrible to listen to, and then kind of like builds into this like apocalyptic Helter Skelter feeling. Yeah, it's really cool. Go and check them out. The final thing I want to discuss is, and kind of wasn't really part of our initial exploration of the Gothic, but I do think should be included here rather than in the next video, is metrical modulation. So changing between different time signatures, which can throw people off. It gives this sense of not being able to find your footing necessarily, or at least having like moments where you feel genuinely lost, which I think can have honestly like a pretty decent shot in the new Gothic, as a way to kind of keep people off balance and keep people in this like weird space without it being just like prog or, you know, something like that. My background is kind of as a Stravinskyan. I did my master's in Stravinsky's early like musical language, and metrical modulation was like a huge part of like The Rite of Spring, and pretty much like his entire output from like The Rite of Spring onwards. I do think that like it has some merit in this kind of music. It's difficult to pull off, but like, you know, I'm going to show you a very, very simple version of what I've done before, that I think again has some merit. I want to return to this track, Into the Void, because it metrically modulates from 6/8 to 4/4. From the verse to the chorus. Like you have this very kind of like obvious, very fast tempo, obviously, waltz into the chorus, which is more 4/4 based. And I think like the weirdness of the metrical modulation is again a useful thing to do in our new Gothic. Again, this track I don't think is going to be on the album. It's like a weird I honestly don't know where I'm going to find a place for it, but like, hey. So I'm going to give you like the lead into the chorus, and it should give you like just enough time to acclimate before we change to 4/4. And that is everything from me tonight. I hope you've enjoyed yourself. This one's been a little bit more music heavy than usual. The next episode is going to be part 2, where we delve into weirder, stranger, and honestly a little bit more interesting musical techniques for the new Gothic. That will be out on the 14th of November, same time, same place, 8 p.m. on Twitch, UK time and EST. And yeah, I hope to see you there. It has been wonderful hosting you. For now, good night.